Hey everybody, welcome back to this week's Tuesday tip where we're going to be talking about this little guy right here. So if you're watching this video right now and you're asking yourself, what is that thing? Or you're watching this and you know what it is and you know that you don't have it in your bike, you're going to want to watch this video. I actually don't have one of these in my bike right now, as you could probably guess because I'm holding it in my hand. But recently I learned that there's a couple good reasons why you definitely need to have this in your bike. So while I talk about that, I'm gonna go back here and I'm gonna take my bike apart and I'm gonna put this in and I'll do some voiceover. So let's get into it. So what exactly is a bottom bracket spacer and what does it do? It's a spacer that goes between bottom bracket bearings to reduce strain by giving the bearings something to always tighten against. So to start, what is a bottom bracket bearing composed of? It's an inner race, steel balls, and an outer race. The outer race is what touches the frame, and the inner race is what goes around the spindle. It's worth mentioning too that the bearing is only meant to spin around one axis. Since bearings can only be pushed into the frame so far before the outer race is stopped, having no spacer means that tightening the cranks pushes the inner bearing races toward the center of the frame and each other. Basically, the outer race cannot move, so the force on the inner race is constantly trying to separate the bearing. This is called side loading. As bearings start to wear, the tolerances between the steel balls and the races grow, allowing them to move independently of each other. If there is any movement between the bearing parts, you will most likely hear it when you pedal. On top of this, having no spacer allows pedaling to put other forces on the bearings. Each rotation of the cranks puts both forward and backward force on each bearing during the entire rotation and tries to make the inner bearing races wobble off axis. In general, this makes for an unnecessary drag on the bearings when pedaling. With cranks getting beefier and spindles growing, bearing size has had to shrink and there is less flex in the cranks or spindle. Unless you have a bottom bracket spacer between the bearings, less flex equals more stress on these smaller bearings when pedaling. Bottom bracket spacers remove the different forces on the bearings by placing something between the inner bearing races. This means that when the cranks are tightened, there's something to tighten against. Rather than constantly pushing the inner races toward each other with nothing to tighten against, the force is distributed evenly and the bearings are not as stressed by tightening or pedaling. Imagine it like this. If you have just an axle in your fork dropouts with no hub and you tighten axle nuts against the dropouts would have nothing to tighten against and would bend toward each other. Add in the hub and the empty space is filled, giving the dropouts something to tighten against. So not only will having a spacer eliminate side load and quiet your creaky bottom bracket, it will also make for a smoother pedaling experience. Another thing this can be good for is the ability to have tight cranks and still be able to crank flip. With the inner bearing races in alignment with the outer races and tight against something on both sides, the tightness of the cranks doesn't have an effect on how they spin. So if you've ever wondered why your cranks won't spin with a loose chain and without loosening your cranks, this is probably the reason. Some frames have different width bottom bracket shells that will require different width spacers. However, if you buy a complete bottom bracket setup, it should come with everything you need for the different width shells. Common widths are 68 and 73 millimeters. My profile bottom bracket came with both a 68mm spacer as well as a 5mm spacer to add together to make 73mm. To know what width your bottom bracket is, simply measure the tube from end to end as shown. And another side note, Odyssey has a great write-up from 2004 on this topic on their site that I'll link below in the description. So what do you think? Are bottom bracket spacers important? Is it worth the trouble of taking out your bearings, or do you not care? I will say that it was absolutely worth it for me and only took about 15 minutes to get done. By putting the spacer in between my bottom bracket bearings and oiling the chain, all creaking was completely removed, pedaling became smoother, and crank flip spun much easier, all within a matter of seconds. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. So that's going to be it, guys. I hope you found this video useful and I hope you learned something. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Goodbye.